Hey everybody, this is the Curious Lockpicker, and I wanted to make a video about one of the hardest transitions in Lockpicker's United belt ranking system, the jump from blue belt to purple belt. If you're unfamiliar with the belt ranking system, you can check out some of the links in the video description for an in-depth explanation. For now, you just need to know that the blue belt ranking encompasses some of the hardest standard pin tumbler locks, such as the American 1100. Purple belt locks are even harder to pick, are categorically high security, and typically have two or more discrete locking mechanisms. Examples of purple belt locks include Medicos and some multi-locks. The difficulty spike between blue and purple belt locks is enormous, so I wanted to make a video with a few tips. Keep in mind that this video is not a replacement for consistent practice, but I'm hoping that it helps nonetheless. That brings me to my first tip: dedication, persistence, and perseverance. While it certainly takes a great deal of persistence to achieve a blue belt, achieving a purple belt requires significantly more, almost to the point of masochism. To defeat purple belt locks, at least at first, you'll need to spend days or weeks with a single lock. You'll need to tear it apart and study the insides. It's common to need to progressively pin the lock to understand how certain pin pairs and how the two or more discrete locking mechanisms interact with one another. Finally, you'll need to experiment with a variety of tools until you find the perfect pair of pick and tension tool that allows you to defeat the lock. Achieving a purple belt requires you to persevere despite repeated failure. It's important to keep marching on without getting overly frustrated. The second tip relates to pace. I strongly suggest that you progressively pin purple belt locks in order to ease yourself into defeating it. Do so slowly and only increase the pin count when you're completely comfortable with the lock's current state. Some purple belt locks, like the Best SFIC and Chicago Duo, cannot be gutted and therefore cannot be progressively pinned. You may want to focus on locks that can be gutted and progressively pinned, at least at first. The third tip is very general, but is perhaps the most important. You must keep your approach to picking dynamic. If you haven't made any progress in several hours of dedicated work, and you're completely unwilling to change any aspect of your approach, then you're very unlikely to get the lock open. It may be a matter of skill, and you might need to progressively pin the lock at a slower pace, but oftentimes it's a matter of being open to change. Seemingly tiny changes to your tensioning technique or pick choice can have a huge impact on your success rate. Additionally, when your picking approach is dynamic, you're more likely to be innovative in coming up with new strategies. I've run into this issue with every single high security lock that I've opened. To keep this video at a reasonable length, I'll use the Multi-Lock Junior as the sole example in this video, but similar stories can be shared about every single one of these locks. I likely have a separate and supplementary video in which I describe my experiences with these other high security locks. My experience with this lock was odd and quite frustrating. I managed to get it open twice on the very same day that I received these Multi-Pick G Pro dimple picks. I then failed to open this lock for a whole 3 weeks. I was completely puzzled by this turn of events, and it took me quite a while to understand what had happened. As it turns out, multi-locks are extraordinarily sensitive to pick placement. Many pickers use a strategy in which they let the width of the tension tool set the pick's lateral placement in the lock. In essence, it makes it so you only have to worry about the pick's rotational state and its depth into the lock. My initial success was caused by the use of this tension tool, which has a tapered end and allows your pick to move around laterally. During the 3-week period where I wasn't having any success, I exclusively used this end of this tension tool. This tool locked my pick into a lateral position where it was just too far from the pin stack to set some of the higher cut pins. Eventually, I realized that my current approach wasn't working and that I needed to make a change. I decided to turn this tension tool around and use this end instead, despite my fear that it would be too easy to overset pins. This thicker end of the tension tool forced my pick to the right of this piece of warding, which allowed my pick to make better contact with both the inner and the outer driver pins. That was the strategic change that allowed me to once again pick this lock consistently. I had this lock picked just a few minutes after making that change, and I had the pick on video within the hour. That's just one example of how tiny changes to your overall strategy can have huge impacts on your success rate. The take-home message is that, when faced with failure, you have to be a bit experimental and dynamic with your approach. If you're unwilling to question your methodology in any way, then you're not going to have a lot of success with purple belt locks. I'll talk about similar experiences that I've had with other high security locks in another video. For now, I want to quickly chat about the fourth and final tip. It's extremely important to not ignore your collection of lower security locks. This is important for a few reasons. First, if you focus solely on high security locks and have little success for many weeks, you're likely to grow frustrated. You may even start questioning if you're as good as you once were. It's important not to forget that wonderful and powerful feeling of getting into locks without the key. Second, focusing on a single lock may pigeonhole you into a single technique. By picking many locks, even if they're lower security, you'll be more likely to vary tension in other aspects to your approach. As I mentioned earlier in the video, remaining dynamic about your approach is absolutely crucial. I'm hoping that this video will help you making that transition from blue to purple belt. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out.